There are fighters who bleed skill, warriors who embody strategy, and then there's Yoel Romero, a man who feels less like an athlete and more like a science experiment gone right. His body doesn't move like a 40-year-old. It explodes like a 20-year-old phenom. His gaze doesn't read tactics. It pierces souls. The moment he steps into the cage, reality bends. Opponents aren't just facing a fighter, they're facing a storm of raw muscle, divine belief, and Olympic-born precision. From Cuba's Olympic wrestling pits to the flashing lights of the UFC, Romero didn't rise, he erupted. He's been called a freak of nature, a biomechanical monster, and the scariest man to never win a UFC title. But titles never defined him. Fear did. Born in Pinar del Rio, Cuba, Yoel Romero's journey began in the shadows of hardship. A life of scarcity gave birth to something unusual. A human forged in adversity, sharpened by discipline. Where most children played, Yoel trained. Where most teens dreamed, Yoel wrestled. Wrestling wasn't just a sport in Cuba, it was salvation, and Romero clung to it with a fury that transcended normal ambition. Every single loss, every ounce of sweat, every broken rib was fuel. He wasn't chasing victory, he was transforming, becoming something terrifying, something future opponents would regret ever signing a contract to face. In 2000, the world got a glimpse of what Cuba already feared. At the Sydney Olympics, Yoel Romero wrestled with the spirit of a predator. Every movement was a calculated snap. His bronze medal win wasn't just a podium finish. It was a statement. A signal that this man could compete with the planet's best and still feel unsatisfied. But Olympic glory wasn't enough. Romero needed more. He needed violence, chaos, and the unfiltered theater of war. He found it inside the cage. And from the moment he transitioned into MMA, it was clear the sport wasn't ready. When Romero finally made his way to the UFC, he was already in his mid-30s, an age where most fighters fade. But he was built differently. With traps like granite hills and reflexes faster than blinking, Romero didn't follow the rules of aging. He defied them. At middleweight, he moved like a featherweight and hit like a heavyweight. And with every knockout, the myth grew. Fans didn't just watch Romero, they witnessed something primal. He wasn't fighting men. He was dissecting them, with knees, with fists, with terrifying bursts of movement that made no sense to the human eye. One moment, Romero would appear flat-footed, almost sleepy. The next, he'd launch into a flying knee that could rearrange a man's DNA. Just ask Chris Weidman. At UFC 205, one brutal, physics-defying knee to the skull silenced Madison Square Garden. Weidman's body crumbled like glass under pressure, and Yoel, silent, composed, unshaken, stood above him like a judgment from the gods. That wasn't a fight, it was a surgical ambush. The crowd gasped. The commentators lost words. And Romero? He whispered a prayer. Because in his world, destruction and faith walked hand in hand. They called him the soldier of God. Not just for his religious discipline, but for the way he merged violence with serenity. Romero never cursed, never gloated, but when the cage closed, he unleashed divine chaos. It wasn't just the knockouts, it was how he made elite fighters hesitate. Champions like Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya admitted they couldn't predict him. Romero didn't fight with rhythm, he fought with rhythm's death. Unorthodox, erratic, explosive. He made timing irrelevant. He turned world-class strikers into nervous calculators, guessing when the bomb would drop. And when it did, it was usually too late. His muscles told one story, his mind told another. Romero didn't just train, he outthought. From wrestling IQ to psychological warfare, he weaponized unpredictability. He would stare at opponents across the cage like a predator studying prey. And when he moved, it was never wasted. He could stand still for minutes, then explode with a single movement that erased consciousness. Fighters feared his pauses more than his punches. Because when Romero paused, something terrifying always followed. Time seemed to bend around him. Most fighters slow down in their 40s. Romero sped up. His training was a mystery. Was it genetics? Cuban athletic programs? Military discipline? Or was it something unexplainable, like divine intervention in athletic form? Fans joked that he wasn't human, that he was a lab creation, that somewhere deep in Cuba, scientists forged the perfect weapon. But behind the muscle was more than just power. It was hunger. Controlled, focused hunger that hadn't been satisfied in decades. And each opponent was just another opportunity to feed it. Even in losses, Romero terrified. Against Robert Whittaker, he turned 5-round wars into cautionary tales. Despite shattered bones and visible exhaustion, he kept marching, landing shots that echoed through the arena. When others broke, he pressed forward. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to test your soul. If you beat him, you'd never be the same. Whittaker won decisions, but his body and mind paid prices no belt could justify. And fans knew you didn't survive Romero. You escaped him. Romero's most controversial performance came against Israel Adesanya. Critics called it bizarre, but under the surface, it was a masterclass in tension. He forced Adesanya, a master striker, into defensive silence. The crowd booed, analysts debated, but those who truly understood saw the brilliance. Romero turned the fight into a chess match made of landmines. At any moment, a slip meant death. Adesanya never opened up. He never risked. Because in front of him stood not just a man, but a consequence. A career-ending one. Romero didn't fight often, but when he did, it became a global event. He wasn't a fan favorite because of charm or trash talk. He was a myth. A walking contradiction. Quiet, yet violent. Calm, yet savage. The way he would kneel in prayer before unleashing chaos only added to the mystique. There was no gimmick, no character, just Yoel, an entity that entered the cage and made even the most hardened fighters doubt everything they knew. He wasn't a volume striker. He didn't need to be. He only needed 1 second, one clean connection, and the careers would spiral. At times he seemed almost bored in the octagon, standing still, hands low, inviting his opponents to step into the unknown. Some called it arrogance, others called it genius. But those who watched closely understood. Yoel was calculating. Every breath, every twitch, every feint had a purpose. He was a veteran predator surrounded by younger lions, and yet none of them could figure out how to avoid his traps. One moment of hesitation and they were gone, snatched into the void by a knee, an elbow, or a punch from a man who wasn't supposed to be this fast at 40. Age was supposed to weaken men. It never touched Romero. He aged in reverse, defying time like a Marvel supervillain. His body, carved like a statue, dense as granite, never betrayed him. At 43, he still looked like he could run through walls. At 44, he made his Bellator debut and the fear followed him there. Different cage, same nightmare. And when he fought, fans didn't cheer, they braced themselves. Because win or lose, Romero would deliver something unforgettable, something violent, something that felt less like sport and more like revelation. The UFC never truly figured him out. Dana White admitted Romero was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much of a wild card to match comfortably. Even when Romero missed weight or came off a loss, no one wanted to face him. There was no reward, only risk. Beating him didn't elevate you, it damaged you. And losing to him? That meant highlight reels, memes, and trauma. He lived in the space between strategy and savagery. Even fighters like Paulo Costa, built like tanks themselves, walked out of Romero fights with their faces rearranged and cardio deleted. Romero wasn't just a threat to health, he was a threat to logic. How could someone built like a heavyweight sprint like a bantamweight? How could a 43-year-old explode with the reaction time of a teenager? Theories exploded online. Was he on something? Was it Cuban genetics? Military bioenhancement? Some swore he was a machine. Others believed he was sent by God himself to show us the limits of human potential. Romero never answered those questions. He just smiled. A cryptic, knowing smile that said, "You wouldn't understand." But what made Romero truly terrifying wasn't just his body. It was his mind. Cold, focused, tactical. While others got lost in the moment, Romero sharpened it. He would lull opponents into false confidence, then explode with calculated violence. His takedowns came when least expected. His knockouts came from impossible angles. And his ability to absorb punishment made him more terrifying. You couldn't hurt him, you couldn't gas him out, you couldn't predict him. All you could do was survive him, if you were lucky. Outside the cage, he remained a man of faith, humility, and devotion. No scandals, no trash talk. Just training, prayer, and a steely discipline that never broke. He spoke softly, but every word echoed with belief. Belief in God, in destiny, and in himself. For Romero, every fight was spiritual warfare. Every cage was a church, and every knockout was divine judgment. He didn't fight for fame. He fought for purpose, for glory, for something higher than money, belts, or rankings. That's why fans followed him, not just for his chaos, but for the sacred storm behind it. His legacy isn't defined by titles, though he came inches away from capturing UFC gold multiple times. It's defined by fear, by the trembling voices of analysts, by the hesitation in elite fighters, by the silence of arenas right before the storm hit. Romero gave the sport something rare: mystique. In an age of overexposure where everything is documented and dissected, Romero remained unknowable. A puzzle that punched. A specter with a fight record. He made danger poetic. When he entered Bellator, some thought his time had passed. They were wrong. His debut against Phil Davis showed that the monster hadn't faded. He had merely shifted terrain. His punches still echoed like gunshots. His stare still pierced cameras. He was still Romero. Older, wiser, but no less terrifying. And now, with fewer fights ahead than behind, the MMA world waits to see what final act this war priest will deliver. One more knockout? One more soul shattered under the weight of his fists? No one knows. But when he walks out, they watch. Because Yoel Romero remains the last man in MMA who makes people hold their breath.